So welcome everyone to our webinar on quagga and zebra mussel prevention planning. My name is Elizabeth Brissotti with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm in our invasive species program. Let me start off by giving you a few tips for using Microsoft Teams in case you're not familiar with it. We do recommend that you use your computer audio. If you have problems with the audio, the best option seems to be to log out and then log back in. There is a option to call in on a phone. It's listed, the phone number is listed in the email I sent out if that computer audio doesn't work. You can hover at the bottom of your screen for a control bar. We're going to ask everyone to type their questions into the chat, and we will be stopping at several points along the way to answer questions. The chat looks like this little sort of bubble symbol here. And I am asking everyone to keep your microphone muted and keep your camera off. That will help save bandwidth. And so I'm going to start off by introducing some other people who are here with us today. Our regional scientists from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and also staff from the Division of Boating and Waterways. So regional scientists, I'm going to go down the list and you can just unmute yourself and give a quick introduction. So starting with our northern region, Michael, are you here?
I am. Good morning, Michael Harris, acting regional scientist and supervisor for inland fisheries.
Thanks. And next is our north central region, Angie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Montalvo. I'm the AIS coordinator for Region 2, the North Central region. And I also have Sierra Harris, my scientific aide, on this webinar as well.
Thanks. And the Bay Delta region.
Michael Stuhldreher, Bay Delta region, Region 3, environmental scientist based out of Santa Rosa.
Great, thank you. And we also have another regional scientist from the Bay Delta region, Catherine Mandela, but she wasn't able to attend this morning. And then next we have our central region.
Hi, that's me. That's Robert Domanowski. I'm the regional scientist for the central region based out of Fresno.
And our South Coast region, I wasn't sure if John, are you here?
Yes, good morning. I'm here, John O'Brien. I'm the fisheries supervisor for the South Coast region. And joining us today from the region is Derek Miller and Andrew Aitken.
Great, thank you. And our inland deserts region.
I'm Ken Sankry. I'm the regional environmental scientist for the inland deserts region, which covers Imperial, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Mono and Inyo counties.
Thanks. And there is a slide at the end of the presentation that has everyone's contact information and the counties that they cover for your reference. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Pardell with the Division of Boating and Waterways, who's going to talk about their grant program. Stephanie, do you want to say hello?
Sure, yeah, hello. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I'm the environmental scientist with the QZ grant program, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
Great, so let me get into the main part of our presentation now. You should be able to see a slide that says overview. The topics we're going to be covering today are the benefits of investing in quagga and zebra mussel prevention, the code and regulations related to quagga and zebra mussels. We'll spend most of our time on how to prepare a prevention plan, talking about the guidance that's available for developing a prevention program, assessment of vulnerability, monitoring program, management actions, and public education, and documenting the prevention program. Then Stephanie will be talking about the State Parks, Division of Boating and Waterways grant program applications. And finally, we'll talk a little more about how our regional staff can help you prepare a prevention plan. So the basic invasive species management approach that CDFW follows is, most importantly, we want to prevent further introductions into or within California. We want to contain invasive species within currently infested waters so that they don't spread any further, and eradicate invasive species from infested areas where feasible. Unfortunately, for aquatic species like quagga or zebra mussels, eradication often is not feasible, which is why we have such a strong focus on prevention. And so this slide shows a map of quagga and zebra mussels in California. It's available on our website. It's a PDF you can download. Most of the locations are in Southern California, and all but one of the infested locations are quagga mussels. We only have one reservoir with zebra mussels. That's San Justo Reservoir, which has been closed to recreation for a number of years. Unfortunately, we did find quagga mussels in 2 new locations in 2021. That was in the Santa Margarita River and Castaic Lake. So if you use this map as part of your training for your staff or part of your prevention plan, please make sure you go and download the updated PDF so that you have the most current information. So let me go over some basics of Dreissenid mussel biology. So they're freshwater bivalves. They are broadcast spawners, and they can release up to 1 million eggs per year. And in warmer waters, they are able to spawn year-round. So that's part of the reason they can spread so quickly. They have 2 life stages. So the adult stage is a benthic or bottom-dwelling stage that attaches to hard substrates. And then the veliger stage is a free-floating planktonic larvae that lives in the water column. And where they can live is limited by calcium, salinity, and pH mainly. Calcium is one of the major determinants of where mussels can survive. And so for veliger survival, zebra mussels need a minimum of 15 milligrams per liter of calcium, and quagga mussels need a minimum of 18 milligram per liters. And that goes into the vulnerability assessment that we'll talk about later on. So if you're on this webinar, I'm guessing you probably already know that there are many benefits to investing in prevention for mussels, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page, let me go over a few examples. So they can have serious impacts to the environment. They can disrupt the food chain because they can filter very large amounts of water and remove plankton from the water. They can outcompete other species, and they can change water quality. And you can see here some photos that show examples of just how densely populated they can become once they infest a water body. They also have some serious impacts to recreation. They can ruin boats if they get onto propellers or they get into the internal systems, very seriously damaging to boats. They can require expensive decontamination. That can be expensive either for the boat owner or for the lake manager who has to do the decontamination. Some lakes have restricted access when they've become infested by mussels in order to prevent their spread elsewhere. And many lakes now have mandatory inspection programs, which of course are important for prevention, but also are costly. Mussels also cause a lot of impacts to infrastructure. If they form dense populations like these pictures show here, they can clog pipes, pumps, fire suppression systems, various components of the water supply system. Once they're in, the removal becomes an ongoing cost. So just as one example, Metropolitan Water District in Southern California calculated that they spent $30 million in the course of 5 years on controlling mussels after they had infested their system. So yet another reason you don't want them in your system, especially if you're a water agency. So because of the damaging impacts of mussels, the legislature passed some laws in the early 2000s to address them, and these are now in California Fish and Game Code. So there are a couple different sections that apply here. Fish and Game Code Section 2301 restricts the importation, possession, and transport of Dreissenid mussels. It also authorizes inspection of conveyances, so watercraft or the trailers that they're on. The enforcement authority for that is given to the Department of Food and Agriculture and to state parks. The Department of Food and Agriculture will stop watercraft that are being driven into the state through the state border stations and inspect those. The Fish and Game Code also authorizes inspections in waters of the state. It requires reporting of mussel detections to Department of Fish and Wildlife. And it also requires control plans to be developed when a reservoir becomes infested. Now for prevention plans, really it's Section 2302 that is most relevant. So this applies to all reservoirs that are open to the public. It requires assessment of the vulnerability of introduction of mussels and requires a prevention program for Dreissenid mussels. In addition to the code sections, there are also sections in the California Code of Regulations, Title 14, that go along with this. It provides definitions to explain what an introduction means, and an introduction in terms of state law refers to either intentional or unintentional placement, and it can be adult or veliger Dreissenid mussels into a reservoir. And a prevention program, according to the regulations, is a written document describing the actions to be implemented at a reservoir to keep Dreissenid mussels from being introduced and to keep them from being moved from the reservoir should they be present. So that's the prevention plan that we're referring to throughout this webinar. In addition, there's a requirement for a dead mussel permit. So if you possess any quagga or zebra mussels, like for instance, if you have some that you use for outreach, I know agencies sometimes have them encased in plastic that they use as outreach items. That does require a permit from the Department of Fish and Wildlife to possess those. And here's just a list of some of the relevant regulation sections for your reference. So again, Title 14, there's section 672.1 that refers to the control plans, prevention programs, the need for annual reports, and the authority to inspect conveyances. And then there's also a section that gives penalty and appeal procedures. So I'm just citing these here so you can look them up if you want to check out the full language. And so section 672.1b is the one that really goes into the requirements for a prevention program. So it requires reservoir owners or managers to summarize their prevention program in a written plan. And it also lists what the plan must include. So it must have a vulnerability assessment for the introduction of mussels, monitoring for mussels, management of recreational activities, and education and outreach. And I'll be covering each of these items later on in the webinar. It also has a requirement for an annual report that needs to be submitted to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so these reports are due by March 31st, and they cover the prior January 1st through December 31st, so calendar year. And they need to describe any changes that have occurred in the reservoir's vulnerability, your monitoring results, and the management activities that you have carried out during that year. So let me stop here and see if there are any questions so far. So again, please do type your questions into the chat. Carrie, can you take a look at the chat and let me know if we have any questions?
No questions so far.
Okay, great. If you do think of anything, feel free to put them in, and when we stop the next time for questions, we can address it then. So in the next section, I'm going to go through the various pieces of a prevention plan one by one. So there are several elements to including your prevention plan. Likely this is information that you have in your files already. And I know sometimes people get intimidated by the thought of having to write one of these plans, but really think of it as something that is useful for your program, useful for training your staff. It's not just checking off a regulatory requirement. It can serve as a training manual. It can also be helpful if you have staff turnover. If someone who's been running your program for many years retires, a prevention plan, having it written down, will help you capture all that information for the next person. So the elements you want to include in prevention plan initially is to start off with a description of the regulatory and environmental setting. Again, vulnerability assessment, monitoring, management of recreational activities, and education and outreach. So the introduction, you want to talk about who the managing authority is for each water body. A plan can cover multiple water bodies, multiple reservoirs. And in fact, if you have a system with several reservoirs, it's good to have one plan that covers all of them so that we can so you can consider all the information in a comprehensive way and consider the connections between them. So you want to include the regulatory setting, who's in charge of your reservoir, the environmental setting, which basically means where is it located, how large is it, what is the source of water. Source of water and also what's downstream is important in terms of thinking about vulnerability for potential spread of mussels. Describe the type of access you have, the number of launch ramps, things like, do you have fish stocking? Then you also want to describe all the different types of recreation that takes place around your reservoir, anything that can touch the water. So fishing, boating, maybe hiking, camping, hunting. Do you have fishing tournaments? What about the use of live bait? And this type of information, you can either write it in a paragraph form or you can display it in a table if that's easier for you to summarize. So one of the elements in the prevention plan is to consider the vulnerability. And so we're thinking about two different types of risk here. There's the vulnerability to introduction and vulnerability to establishment. And so introduction refers to the probability that mussels will be brought into the waterway. And that depends on the pathways that could bring them in. And that goes into your vulnerability assessment. That's the required piece for the prevention plan. And when you're looking at the risk of establishment, however, you're thinking about the potential that mussels, if they get introduced, would then be able to survive and reproduce. And so that depends on the mussel biology in relation to your water chemistry. And that's going to influence the monitoring and management actions that are appropriate for your reservoir. So in terms of how to conduct a vulnerability assessment, first you want to think about all of the pathways, either natural or human mediated, describe those, and then identify potential management actions. And I'm going to show an example in the next couple of slides on one way you might do that. So think about all the ways mussels could be brought in, the source of water, the recreational activities, but also think about maintenance equipment, in-water equipment. For instance, does your agency have equipment or boats that go between different reservoirs? Are there other agencies that come into your reservoir? Is your reservoir used for firefighting? Or are there researchers that come into your reservoir and potentially are going into other waters that might be bringing in equipment that could spread mussels? Try to think about anything that's coming to touch the water in your reservoir. And so this table shows an example of some common pathways of introduction and how you might list them in relation to potential management actions. So for natural pathways, we're usually thinking about either open water flowing from an upstream source, which could potentially be managed through chlorination or filtration, or flooding is the other common natural pathway. Most of the pathways we're thinking about, though, are human mediated. So starting with watercraft, motorized watercraft have the most risk, but non-motorized watercraft like canoes or kayaks can also be a potential source of risk. You could have law enforcement watercraft, boats from other resource agencies, rental boats. So think about all those different types of watercraft that might be in your reservoir. And there are a number of different potential management actions that you could consider. You could have a requirement for self-inspection where people have to, say, fill out a form every time they launch and they carry it with them when they're on the lake, and that could be checked by law enforcement. You might have a inspection program with trained staff where they inspect each boat before it can launch. Mandatory dry periods or requiring decontamination, those are also options. Another possible pathway is fishing, and this can include anglers and their equipment, fishing tournaments, especially if you have people coming in from a large area for a tournament. Live bait is also a potential source of mussels. And finally, is there fish planting? Where is that coming from? And what kind of procedures are the people doing the fish planting using to make sure that mussels or other aquatic invasive species couldn't be brought in? And again, there are a number of potential management actions that you could consider, like requiring inspections for fishing gear, providing gear cleaning stations, putting conditions on the fishing tournaments that they monitor the people coming in, have restrictions on live bait, either inspecting it or have restrictions based on the origin of the live bait. All these can help mitigate the risk of introduction. some other common pathways. So in-water equipment, we're thinking about things like construction equipment, docks, floating restrooms, firefighting equipment. To mitigate that risk, you could require that all incoming equipment be inspected, maybe require a certain amount of dry time if equipment is something that can't really be drained. Coordinate with firefighting agencies to find out what methods they're using to make sure they aren't spreading mussels. Consider decontamination. If you have facility maintenance with some larger equipment or smaller field gear, again, inspection or decontamination is a possibility. And also think of potential pathways that might be less common. Aerial contact. I know some reservoirs have different types of seaplanes that can land. You might want to prohibit planes coming in from any infested waters or have some sort of control over where they're coming from to make sure that's not a source. And as I mentioned, researchers, if they're bringing in gear, talk to them and make sure they understand the potential for introduction and require that they clean their gear before they come to your water body. So I'm going to go through an example pathway assessment here. And on our website, we do provide some guidance documents that you can use to write your prevention plan. We have one that's just a narrative with instructions and another that's an example template it's optional, but it might help you organize your information. And so this table I'm showing here is something that's shown in that template as an example. So for instance, let's say you're doing a vulnerability assessment for the pathway of pleasure boating. And at your reservoir, you don't allow any fishing from the watercraft, and you have both motorized and non-motorized boating. So the who that's bringing this in is just the public. The what is you have boaters coming from throughout the state, but many of your visitors are local residents. That impacts your risk as well. Are people just from the local area, or do you get a lot of visitors from far away? So here we're using our example lake as Happy Valley Lake, and we're saying that it has north and south boat ramps that have kiosks for self-service. And this is a lake that's open year round, but it has visitation highest from May through October, and people can boat from sunrise to dusk. So those are all the kind of details you want to consider in your vulnerability assessment. And then next, you want to think about the management and outreach actions. And these can either be, you can describe actions you're already taking, or you can think about either new actions to take, or if you don't really have a prevention program yet, think about what you could do. So for example, potential actions to mitigate an introduction might be installing a watercraft inspection program or installing a gate to limit access hours. You can consider offering a banding program to expedite launching of boats, returning boats. And some agencies have cooperative programs with other nearby agencies so that boaters make it easier for boaters to go from lake to lake, but also for the lakes to make sure that the boaters are not potentially infested. You could offer a self-serve decontamination unit, or you could limit boating season to reduce the risk. You might also consider educational and outreach opportunities. So your inspectors talking to boaters as they're doing inspection is an outreach opportunity. You could post some informational posters at your boating ramps, or maybe post something more permanent like a metal sign. So let me stop here. We're going to talk more details about monitoring and management actions in a moment, but let me stop here and see if there are any questions on what we have so far.
Still nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. Well, good. Hopefully this is clear to everyone then. So now let's talk about incorporating the risk of establishment. As I said, this is based on the mussel biology and related to the chemical and physical properties of your water body. So this includes calcium, salinity, pH, and the minimum and maximum water temperature. And this is important for selecting the appropriate mussel monitoring schedule and the management actions that you would want to include in your plan. So first of all is measuring water quality for calcium, pH, salinity, and temperature. Now I do need to make clear here, this is not required by state law, but it is helpful to determine your risk and your appropriate mussel monitoring. And I don't have time to go into a lot of detail on it here, but if you contact me, I can certainly put you in touch with people in our program who can provide advice on this. So ideally, you want to collect water quality information several times per year and at several locations within your water body. So the map that's here with these little stars, these are showing examples of where you would want to collect data. So the center of the lake, any inflows or outflows, and any arms on the lake. That will help you get a broad picture of the water quality throughout the lake, because calcium and the other factors can vary by location. Now, monitoring for mussels is required by law. More importantly, it provides a measure of your prevention program effectiveness. This is early detection monitoring. So if any mussels did get into your water body, you would want to know right away to stop the spread to other waters so that you could take action at your water body. And also, if you are planning to apply for a Boating and Waterways grant, they do require this monitoring data as part of the grant application. So there are 3 types of monitoring methods that are commonly used: surface surveys, artificial substrates, and plankton tows. And CDFW updated our protocols on our website in 2021. The basic methods didn't change, but we did update the protocols to hopefully be a little more easy to follow. So please take a look at that. And these are there to help you learn how to monitor, and our regional scientists can provide advice on and training on monitoring methods as well. So I'm going to go through each of these methods now. So surface surveys is used to detect both juvenile and adult mussels as they're starting to settle on hard substrates. It's typically done monthly. The period during the year will depend on the water temperature in relation to when mussels can survive. It's pretty minimal equipment cost. It's mostly just your staff time. And basically you're doing a survey of all hard substrates, a dam, a dock, rocks, things like that. The next type of monitoring is artificial substrates, and this is used primarily if you don't have a lot of other hard substrate around your reservoir. It's also done for juveniles, adults, monthly, when water temperature is appropriate. And typically, artificial substrates consist of several tiles like this attached together on a line. They're hung in the water at maybe at a boat ramp or several other locations. They're brought out of the water and monitored once a month. Equipment cost is not much. It's around $50 or so. There are some commercial kinds you can buy, or you can fabricate them yourself, so not too expensive. And you can document what you find on them with a data sheet or with photos. And the third type of monitoring is plankton tows. So this is done specifically to look for the larvae, the veliger form of mussels. It's done with a net. You can see a picture of larvae here and the net that's typically used. The sampling frequency is once or twice per month, and that's based on the water temperature and your relative risk. Again, do it during the year and the months when the water temperature is appropriate. This is more expensive. The cost of a net and line can be something like $350, plus it usually requires a boat, so more expensive. But as you'll see, the type of monitoring that CDFW recommends varies depending on the risk of your reservoir. And so we have a recommended monitoring diagram that's available on our website in the same section with the protocols. I'll be going through each section on this in the next few slides, so don't worry if you can't read it all. But basically, the recommended monitoring varies depending mostly on the calcium level, and that's assuming that pH and salinity are appropriate for mussels to survive. So first of all, if your reservoir is high calcium, which we're defining as greater than 24 milligrams per liter. Adult mussels will be able to survive long term. There will be reproduction and a full completion of the life cycle. And if veligers are introduced, they will be able to survive. And the monitoring we recommend in that situation is to use plankton tows twice per month when the water temperature is 16 to 24 degrees Celsius, that's 61 to 75 Fahrenheit, or once per month at 12 to 16 Celsius or 24 to 28 Celsius. And we, in addition, recommend that you conduct surface surveys or artificial substrates if you don't have surfaces for those surface surveys, at least monthly. And this is why the water quality monitoring to determine your calcium is important, because that helps you know whether you should be doing plankton tows to have an effective monitoring program. Now, if your calcium is what we consider moderate, that's 15 to 24 milligrams per liter, then adult mussels can survive long term. There will be reproduction, but the survivorship will be reduced because there's inadequate calcium for veliger development. The survivorship, however, will increase the closer you get to that 24 milligrams per liter measurement. And so late stage veligers that are introduced are likely to survive. The monitoring we recommend in this case is the same as for the higher calcium level. Again, the plankton tows, twice or once per month, depending on water temperature, plus surface surveys and or artificial substrate surveys. And these recommendations based on the temperature and the calcium that I'm describing here are things that CDFW developed based on a synthesis of available literature over the past few years. So we're not using one source here, we're using a combination of sources to develop recommendations that we feel are most effective for monitoring. Now, if your calcium is lower, we're calling low calcium 12 to 15 milligrams per liter. In that case, the adult mussels are not able to survive long term. You might have some reproduction, but the veligers will not be able to survive due to the lack of calcium to develop their shells. Some veligers introduced at a later stage of development might still be able to survive and settle, however. So in this situation, we don't recommend monitoring. Plankton tows simply would not be very effective because you won't have veliger surviving very well. So this is where surface surveys and artificial substrate surveys become more important, because that would be probably the only form of surveys you're doing. And finally, if you have very low calcium, so less than 12 milligrams per liter, the adult mussels cannot survive long term. There will not be reproduction. Veligers probably cannot survive. However, state law still requires that you conduct mussel monitoring. The State Fish and Game Code does not make any distinction based on calcium or any other form of risk in terms of mussel monitoring. It says that any reservoir open to the public must have mussel monitoring and include that as part of a prevention program. So again, for very low calcium, you would be focusing on surface surveys and artificial substrate surveys. And determining how to do these surveys and where to do them within your reservoir is something that our regional scientists can help with. So if you don't know how to go about this, aren't sure where to start, I encourage you to contact your regional scientist and get some advice. And so here's an example of how you might describe your monitoring program within your prevention plan. So we're going to say this is Happy Valley Lake, and we're saying that the calcium is 28 milligrams per liter. So it's a high calcium reservoir. So in this situation, they're saying they're going to use all three monitoring methods. For the plankton sampling, they're listing the locations they're going to do the sampling. So 2 different boat ramps, dam, an outlet, a marina, near their porta potties, and near the inlet of a creek. They're saying May through October are the dates when the water temperature is likely going to be appropriate for plankton sampling, but you do want to check the temperature each month to make sure of that. These will be done twice per month, and the sampling will be done by the Happy Valley Water District. They're also planning to do surface surveys at several locations, boat ramps and their dam. Again, May through October, once per month, conducted by the Water District, and also an artificial substrate at a boat dock. So this is an example of the kind of table you might want to put in your prevention plan to summarize the monitoring you're planning to do. And the next section of a prevention plan, and the final requirement in the plan, is to describe management of recreational activities. And again, you want to consider all the different pathways that could bring mussels into your reservoir and describe what you're already doing to manage them, plus any additional actions you might consider taking. So you could do inspections of watercraft, either self-inspections, requiring people to have their boats clean, drained, and dry, or having actual screenings with staff to do that. And you could have your staff trained through the WIT training, that's watercraft inspection training, offered by a company in California called by Quagga several times throughout the year. So that training is available for your staff. You might require decontamination, a certain dry time for boats to launch, exclusion of boats from certain areas, or banding so that you know where boats are coming from and can manage who's coming in. You could provide gear cleaning stations. You might consider restrictions on live bait. And you could consider restricting access, for instance, by locking a gate when you don't have inspectors available. You also need to include some public education and outreach in your plan. So CDFW has outreach materials that we can provide, either on paper or PDFs if you prefer to print them yourselves or incorporate them into your outreach materials. We have Don't Move a Mussel posters like you see here. And we have this available in a form as a poster and a rack card. They're nice because they have diagrams on them that show boaters all the different places that they should be inspecting. You could incorporate Quagga and zebra mussel prevention information into interpretive programs at your water body. For instance, if there's a campground that does like campfire talks or something, incorporate that there. Train your staff to educate the public. And if you don't have specific instructors, then you could train your rangers or people at the entry kiosk who can all talk to the public and make sure that boaters and other people visiting understand about what they need to do to make sure they don't move any mussels. Providing information on your website is a great low-cost option for public outreach, and that might allow you to reach visitors who are new to your water body before they come there. And finally, community presentations. If there are annual festivals, holding booths there. These days, I know a lot of people are still doing virtual presentations, but partner with a local community group. Maybe you can give a presentation to them, either live or online. There are a lot of different options you can consider here, many of which are very minimal cost, and that will improve your public education and outreach. And so there is a requirement to submit an annual report to CDFW on March 31st. And this is due on March 31st, covering the previous calendar year, so January through December. So the report that's due March 31st next year is going to cover all of 2021. So the requirements for that report is that you need to summarize any changes in vulnerability at your reservoir. So that might be something like if you open an additional boat ramp and now you're more vulnerable to introduction because more people are coming boating, or conversely, if you establish a new inspection program, and so maybe your vulnerability has decreased because now boats are being inspected. You also need to include a summary of your monitoring results. And we would like to receive a copy of your results in a spreadsheet or however you compile them to include in our statewide database. So include, and please give us any monitoring from your mussel monitoring, your water quality, and also include information on visitor use in your report. And finally, describe the implemented management activities. So what the actions you took such as inspections, any regulations, installing a gate, etc., whatever was done either new or continuing throughout that year, the pathways that it was addressing, whether it's boating, fishing, maintenance equipment, etc., and any relevant details. And we provide a template that you can use. It is an optional template, but it will help you organize your information. So that's available on our website and can help you. And so before you start working on your prevention plan, what I recommend is read the materials that are available on our website. Those can be very helpful to you, and contact your regional scientist for advice. I think it's a good idea to talk to your regional scientist when you're just getting started, let them know you're planning to write a plan, and run any questions or concerns by them before you get started. And as I said, you likely have much of the information that's going into this plan already available in your files, things like visitor use, what types of recreation, and so on. So you should be able to pull this together. And the process for review is that you'll submit a draft plan to CDFW that can go to your regional scientist. These plans are reviewed by the regional scientist and by me. I coordinate this on a statewide level. We will then return a list of comments to you and require your revisions. And I think every plan that I've reviewed in the last couple of years has needed some revisions, sometimes small revisions, sometimes more major ones. So plan in time for revisions into your process. And then you'll resubmit the plan after you've addressed those comments. And once everything is complete and we believe that it meets the qualifications of Fish and Game Code Section 2302, CDFW will give you an acceptance letter stating that. And then in terms of revising the plan, that's just done as needed. There is no expiration date on these plans. There is no requirement to revise them on any certain time schedule. You know, it's probably a good idea to take a look at them every few years to make sure that nothing major has changed, but there is no formal requirement for revision. And I should also mention here that the regulations related to prevention plans changed in 2016. That was when the requirement came into effect for CDFW to review the plans, and that's when we started issuing letters. So if you have an older plan before 2016, that needs to be updated and submitted to CDFW for us to review in order to be in compliance with the current regulations. And that's also important if you are planning to apply for a DBW grant, because they will require that acceptance letter from us. So I'm going to stop again for questions. And after this, we're going to have Stephanie from Boating and Waterways talk about their grant program. So Carrie, any questions?
Yeah, we do have one question now on monitoring. Someone asked, can you please explain how monitoring programs might differ for invaded versus non-invaded reservoirs?
Okay, so if your reservoir is invaded and if it's considered infested by CDFW, then it has a different set of requirements. Then it's required to produce a control plan. And there's another person in our program, Dominique Norton, on a statewide level who coordinates control plans, but the regional scientists can also help you with that. And so the monitoring for that, obviously you already know the mussels are there, but monitoring is still required to delineate the infestation, I believe is the language in the code. So in other words, basically to track how many, how large the population is and any changes in the population. So there are some different requirements for infested reservoirs. So I would recommend talking to the regional scientists for that. And it's Fish and Game Code Section 2301 is what applies there. But yes, there are some differences in the monitoring requirements for infested versus non-infested reservoirs. And what I've been describing here is assuming that your reservoir does not have mussels.
Okay, got another question.
Okay.
Can you be more specific about the water quality data that should be reported / submitted in the annual report?
So That would be if you have any data on calcium that I mentioned, pH, salinity, water temperature, since those are all things that go into affecting the types of mussel monitoring and your relative risk. So if you have collected that data, please submit it with the annual report. It's the mussel monitoring data that's what's required. The water quality data is not specifically required, but it is helpful for us to have to help CDFW in our database. So if you do have that, please do submit it with the annual report.
And one more quick question, just for clarification, if they submit the draft plan to regional scientists or to headquarters in Sacramento?
Generally, it's submitted to the regional scientists, and the regional scientists will then forward it on to me, and I'll read it as well. There is one exception to this, which if you have, if your agency covers, let's say, multiple counties, and you happen to cross 2 of our CDFW regions, then I'm the person who takes the lead on reviewing the plan. However, you can still submit it to the regional scientists and it will make its way to me, but you would want to coordinate with both regional scientists there. So at the end of the presentation, I've got a slide that lists the regional scientists and the counties they cover. That's also available as a separate file on our website. So if you are in a situation where you're a larger agency covering multiple counties, the review is a little different. The main process is the same. It's just more people need to be involved. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to Stephanie Pardell, who is with the Division of Boating and Waterways, and she's going to talk about their prevention grant program, which is a great resource for funding for developing a prevention plan, and if you already have a plan, for implementing some of these actions that are required. So Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Elizabeth. I'm just going to turn my camera on for just a little bit, just for the introduction, so you can all put a name to a face. My name is Stephanie Pardell, and I'm the environmental scientist with the Division of Boating and Waterways, Quagga and Zebra Mussel Infestation Prevention Grant Program, which we just call the QZ Grant for short. And as Elizabeth mentioned, I'll just be talking today about our QZ Grant program, and I will also be identifying how it is relevant to you as you prepare your prevention plans. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so first off about our program, the projects that we reimburse are broken up into 2 tiers. So tier 1 is mainly the preparation of the prevention plan, and tier 2 is the implementation of these plans. So most of the people who are here today will probably be more interested in tier 1, especially because, as Elizabeth mentioned before, to be eligible for a tier 2 project, you must have that letter from CDFW stating that your prevention plan has been accepted by them. So for tier 1, we will be focusing on the prevention plans today. And I'd also like to highlight this first bullet point here. Applicants for the 2022 grant cycle, which is the upcoming grant cycle, you must include early detection mussel monitoring data that has been collected since March 2021. And that will just demonstrate that the reservoir is currently uninfested by QZ mussels. And we'll go into detail a little bit later on in the presentation just to talk about our early detection mussel monitoring data requirements. Next slide, please. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about our eligibility requirements. So first off, as an applicant, you must be an owner or a manager of any aspect of the water in a reservoir. The reservoir must be open to the public for recreation. And then finally, again, the reservoir must be uninfested by QZ mussels, as we are a prevention and not a control grant. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide just goes into a couple of the projects and tasks that we would reimburse you for. So for a tier 1 project, we would be reimbursing for any activities having to do with the preparation of a prevention plan. And that includes things like early detection mussel monitoring and water chemistry monitoring. Whereas for tier 2, we would be looking more at inspectors or inspection services, public outreach such as signage or training, equipment such as decontamination equipment, supplies such as bands, and then also for Tier 2, we also reimburse for the monitoring discussed above, so the EDMM, early detection mussel monitoring data, and also the water chemistry monitoring. And please note, this list is not all-inclusive, so if you are thinking of tasks that are not included here, you could always put them in your application, and then we can decide whether that would be reimbursable for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's more detail about our early detection mussel monitoring requirements. And there's kind of two stages for this requirement. So at the applicant stage, at a minimum, you would just need to provide service survey and or artificial substrate data just to demonstrate that there's no infestation of a QZ mussel in your reservoir. If you have Plankton Tow data, that's great, please provide that. But just at a minimum, we would like any data demonstrating that there is no infestation currently. And we do want to point out that EDMM is a grant reimbursable task, and we want to highlight that for you because in the grantee stage, the type and frequency of the EDMM required might be different from the monitoring that you are currently conducting. And so Elizabeth mentioned earlier CDFW's chart showing that monitoring that they are requiring or they are hoping that you would do. So we also use that same chart to determine the type and frequency of EDMM that we would require you to do. And you would be required to do that according to that chart, but you would be sending us the data at least twice throughout the grant cycle term. So if that is more monitoring than you are used to, you may want to ask for reimbursement for that. Okay, next slide, please. If you want to be the first to know when we open the grant cycle, you will want to subscribe to our grant notices, and that's on our website at dbw.parks.ca.gov/QZ-grant. You can click on the link called Subscribe to QZ Grant Program Notifications and fill out the information there. We will be accepting applications for the new grant cycle very soon, so our notices will kick off in January. Application materials for the new cycle should be posted on our website no later than February. And then our application period is expected to open in March of 2022. So if you have any questions, you can email us at our team email at qzgrant@parks.ca.gov. Or also you can ask me directly. I believe there's a question and answer period right after this presentation as well. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Stephanie. And Libby just mentioned to everyone that DBW does provide a lot of great materials on their website to help you understand what they require for the grants. When the application period opens, they post instructions that are helpful, and also they typically do a webinar in the spring themselves specifically about the grant program. So if you subscribe to their notifications, you'll be able to get information on that. So any questions for Stephanie before we move on?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, and with that, we'll get to the final portion of our presentation. So I'd like to describe how our regional staff can help you. And there are many resources we provide and many ways that the staff can help you work through the different elements of a prevention plan. So they can help you with the plan preparation. So they can help you identify the potential vectors, pathways for mussel introduction at your water body, and suggest prevention measures that you could incorporate into your program. They can also provide training on the monitoring methods, on watercraft inspections, on how to track your inspection data. They can help you with advice on water quality sampling, especially the calcium sampling. Our staff, we may have data for your water body because we have collected data in some locations around the state. So you can talk to the regional scientists and see if any data is already available. They can help you with information on, mussel monitoring, training on how to do that, as I said. We do also offer plankton sample analysis at our lab in Bodega Bay. However, I have to say that we have limited capacity there, and we can only take samples for analysis if they have been approved in advance. Our lab can only handle so many samples per year, so we have to plan that out at the beginning of each calendar year in terms of what they're able to handle. And we're only able to do the sampling for the higher calcium reservoirs. So if you're interested in that, please contact our Bodega Bay lab, or you can contact me and I can put you in touch with Jim Snyder, who runs the lab there, to see if there is capacity available for analysis. And we can also provide educational materials. I mentioned the posters, the rack cards. We have those available for your education and outreach. And we offer resources on our website that can be helpful. So we have files you can download. We have a guidance document that talks about information on preparing a plan, a template that you can use that is optional. You don't have to use that template, but might help you organize your information. We have the monitoring protocols, as I mentioned, that were recently updated, and those have data sheets going along with them that you could use for your monitoring program. We also have some other outreach and education items, such as a boat cleaning guidebook posted on our website. And this is our this wildlife.ca.gov/mussels is our main quagga and zebra mussel website. And if you are planning to apply for a DBW grant application, here are some tips for you to make your application more successful. So regardless of which type of application you're applying to, definitely talk to your regional scientists as soon as possible. They might be able to help you with monitoring and calcium data. If you are planning a Tier 2 application and you do not yet have a prevention plan, if you need to get it, accepted before that application deadline, be sure you get it into us early so we have plenty of time to review it and talk about potential revisions. I'd recommend getting it to us at least 2 months before the DBW grant deadline. That's because we need time to review it, to get comments back to you. Just getting the acceptance letter signed can take a couple of weeks on our end. So my plea here is, if you need to write a prevention plan in order to apply for a DBW Tier 2 application, give yourself plenty of time. Don't send it to us a couple of weeks before the deadline and think it's going to get signed, because we just can't do it that quickly. So start planning your prevention plan now. And finally, this is the contact information for our CDFW regional scientists. It lists their counties they cover, emails and phone numbers, and there's also this information is also on our website as a PDF you can download, since things do change over time. As we mentioned, we have in our northern region, Michael is filling in for our regional scientist who recently retired up there. So when that position gets refilled in a few months, there'll be a new person there. But as I said, these are the people you want to start with in terms of advice. And so I'm going to end here. This is my contact information in our General Invasives Program email. And so let me ask Carrie, are there any final questions?
Nothing else has shown up in the chat.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today, everyone. This webinar has been recorded, and I'm hoping to have it posted on our CDFW website within a couple of weeks. I will send an email out when it's available, so that if you have other staff who couldn't attend today, they can watch it. But thank you for joining us, and if you think of any questions later, feel free to contact me or contact your regional scientist. And I hope you found this presentation useful.